taking a closer look at the infection fatality rate of COVID-19, okay, or IFR for short. Now, the mainstream media, the government, the bureaucrats, they never bring the IFR to the attention of the public, okay, and one has to ask the question why. Okay, we've been told that we're in a global deadly pandemic, so don't you think that it would be in the public's best interest to be made aware of expert estimates on the true fatality rate of COVID-19, estimates that are based on very complex modeling? Don't you think it would be in our best interest to know this kind of stuff? Well, clearly the government doesn't think so. Clearly the government would prefer to peddle in fear. The mainstream media would prefer to reinforce that narrative of fear because it results in what? Views, clicks, more dollars for the sponsors. And of course the pharmaceutical corporations would much prefer the peddling of fear because that helps them to flog their products all over to the world to a market of billions of people. But anyway, before we talk about IFR, I'm just gonna go through a definition with you guys to put this segment in context. This is really, really important. This is coming from nature.com. The difference between CFR, which is case fatality rate, which is based on PCR tests, and IFR, which is based on an estimate of total infections. Okay, it says here, case fatality rates can be defined as the number of deceased over the number of detected infections to investigate the risk patterns for COVID-19 mortality across countries. This number, however, does not account for the undetected infections and depends on the amount of testing and the testing strategy, which substantially varied across time and between countries. By contrast, estimation of the infection fatality rate, IFR, defined as the ratio of deceased versus infected, relies on estimates of the actual number of infections, including the non-detected. Okay, so I hope that all makes sense there. The sources that I plan to present to you during this segment of the show include the World Health Organization, okay, nature.com, pubmed.gov, bmcpublichealth.com, and medrxiv.org. You can look up all of these institutions right here. And as I've mentioned there, sources cited in this report are comprised of government/international bodies and highly esteemed journals, okay? So we're not using websites that just fell out of the sky, some weird domain name with a WordPress extension. We're going for sources that are internationally recognized. All right, so here's a little disclaimer before I get to the meat of the presentation. It says here, figures quoted in this report are estimates based on complex modeling published by highly educated experts and are open to further scrutiny and analysis. Figures from meta-analysis are cited in this report. Further understanding of these figures can be obtained via viewing the relevant citations. It is highly recommended to read all studies in full in order to gain a more comprehensive understanding of infection fatality rate estimates. If you'd like a copy of the sources referenced, enter your email at mcjreport.com/join. Okay, so all the documents and studies I'm about to reference, if you want a copy, mcjreport.com/join. Alrighty, now I'm going to just take you through the studies and publications and organizations that I've used for this particular segment. I'm going to just run through them, and then I'll reveal to you the infection fatality rate estimates published by each. Okay, so we're looking at the World Health Organization here. We've got PubMed, of course, a US government organization that sits above the National Library of Medicine, more specifically the National Center for Biotechnology Information. We have a couple of references from nature.com. Okay, also we have bmcpublichealth.com, and we have medrxiv.org. Okay, so these are the organizations, institutions, and journals that we'll be referencing. Okay, so let's get to it, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to take you through the estimates from each of these entities. Okay, so Okay, we've got biomedcentral.com. This was a study from a specific town in Germany, listed at the top there, which came in at 0.41%. Okay, so in other words, you're looking at a documented survival rate of 99.6% or 99.59%. All right, example number 2. The World Health Organization global estimate of IFR 1 to 0.5%, or in other terms, a 99 to 99.5% survival rate. So that's openly published by the World Health Organization. Okay. Number 3 here, again from PubMed. Okay, so a meta-analysis, I believe, from 34 geographical regions. 10 years old, infection fatality rate 0.002%. 25 years of age, 0.01%. 55 years, 0.4%. 65 years, 1.4%. 75 years, 4.6%. And of course, it's important to point out that at around that age, there tends to be certain comorbidities catching up with various individuals at that stage of their life. And then 85 plus 15%, which is, of course, the life expectancy. I believe the average life expectancy in Australia is around the early 80s. Now, I've put down here, figures do not account for comorbidities or sex. That's right. So it's been documented that males are generally at higher risk. All right, let's keep this moving along here. We have nature.com, 45 countries. Okay, so children 5 to 9 years old, infection fatality rate published 0.001%. Okay, so that's 99.99 fill in the blank. 80 years plus, we have 8.29%. Okay, which is lower than what we've seen here at 15%. Okay, now we have some country-specific infection fatality rates, and these are for people, both men and women, under the age of 65 years old. Okay, so Japan coming in at 1.09%, or a survival rate of 99%. We have Italy at 0.94%, France at 0.65%, Pakistan at 0.16%, and Kenya, where it's nice and sunny, coming in at 0.09%. Okay, now again, these figures do not account for comorbidities or gender. All right, now it's also important to point out that those people who passed away, whose deaths were attributed to COVID-19, it's often quite a grey area, and often we don't know exactly the chain of events that led up to a certain individual's death, especially when taking into consideration the fairly loose death reporting guidelines for COVID as stated by the World Health Organization. All right, again, we have nature.com. Now, this is specifically in relation to 65-year-old women. Norway, we have 0.004% infection fatality rate. Denmark, 0.009%. Germany, 0.013%. Scotland, 0.085%. Belgium, 0.09%. England and Wales, 0.092%. United States, 0.102%. Okay, so we have that's the risk of dying, okay, the estimated infection fatality rate. And as it states down the bottom here, these figures do not account for comorbidities. All right, now finally here, we have the publication from medrxiv.com, over 32 locations, all ages. The published estimated risk of dying from COVID here, 0.27%, or if we're looking at only people younger than 70 years of age, it comes in here at 0.05%. Okay, so that's like 99.95 survival, I believe, if you were to convert it to a survival rate. We have here, figures do not account for comorbidities or sex. That's right. So that's that particular study right there. So Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, I hope that you found that particular segment interesting, and I think it's very important to try and put this situation into context. Let me ask you the question at home. Are you familiar with some of these studies that I've cited? If you are, have you seen these studies referenced on the mainstream media? Have you seen governments speak about these studies, or people to the likes of Daniel Andrews? Now, I suppose that's a little bit of a rhetorical question, because I know the answer, and I know that governments have not been speaking about these particular studies, and they, as far as I'm concerned, have never even mentioned anything about the infection fatality rate of this supposedly novel coronavirus. Now, why won't government and MSN address these studies? Why do you think that could possibly be? Okay, so whenever I'm faced with a situation that doesn't make sense, I think to myself, there must be something not being said. There must be some type of agenda at play. I don't know what the agenda is. I'm not really here to speculate too much. So what I do is I look at who stands to benefit the most from suppression of perfectly legitimate expert information, okay, information published by international bodies, government bodies, and well-esteemed journals. Who stands to benefit? Well, politically speaking, we see leaders around the world who have been able to consolidate an extraordinary amount of executive power in their hands under the guise of keeping everybody safe from an allegedly very deadly virus. We've seen the pharmaceutical corporations and the tech corporations rake in profits to the likes of which they have never seen before. Okay, and we also see what I would describe as a greater consolidation of power and influence in certain global multilateral institutions, such as the United Nations, but I suppose in this instance, more specifically, the World Health Organization, due to all the lockdowns and policy which has been, I suppose, justified by the government in response to keeping us safe. Well, at least that's what the government likes to try and convince us of. We've also seen a tremendous transfer of wealth. That's right, a tremendous transfer of wealth from the middle working class to the absolute upper echelon of society in terms of the big corporations, and of course power has been transferred as well from the working class into the hands of politicians, most of whom would sell us out in exchange for simply preserving and advancing their own career. So that's my presentation. If you would like me to send you each of these studies so you can read through them more thoroughly in your own time, go to mcjreport.com/join, put your email address in. I'll send them all to you. I think it's important to understand at least the basics of the modeling so you can gain a more comprehensive understanding of where exactly these figures came from. And it's also important to point out that I have cited various meta-analysis, and these particular studies reference several other studies, which are in the citations of the studies of which I'll send to you should you want a copy